Consider a program that asks the user to read a number of stars. It asks the user to enter a number of stars and then print so many number of stars on the screen. Here the task is to print stars, and we have to perform this task 10 times because the number of stars given by the user is 10. So this task has to be performed 10 times. So whenever we want to perform the same task a repeated number of times, the best tool to go for is the for loop. So this is how we can design a program. Initially we need to read the number of stars from the user. So here we make use of for loop. We iterate from the value of j equals to 0 until the value of j reaches number of stars, and we go on printing star. We go on printing star as long as the value of j is less than number of stars. This is how we can print 10 stars in a row using for loop. Suppose we want to increase the complexity of the program. Now we want to write a program to read the number of rows and the number of stars to be printed. That means you ask the user to enter the number of rows of stars to be printed. For example, if the user enters the number of rows as 5 and number of stars as 10, that means 5 rows of 10 stars each is supposed to be printed on the output. If we look at the program statement here, once again the task is the same. We just have to print the given number of stars. This part of the flowchart shows how to print a given number of stars. But in this case, we just don't have to print 10 stars. We have to repeat this task 5 times because we have to print 5 rows of 10 stars each. So once again, whenever we want to repeat a task a given number of times, the best way to do that is to write it inside some for loop. So we are going to write this for loop inside another for loop, thus creating nested for loops. So here we have, this is the code, this orange block is the code which is used to print n number of stars, and then this outer for loop governs the total number of rows of stars to be printed. Now let us see how the execution of this code proceeds. So we have one for loop nested inside another for loop to get those rows of stars to be printed on the screen. Now let us code our program looking at this flowchart. So according to the flowchart, initially we need to read the number of rows and the number of stars. So I'll go back to my Python tutor online application, and here we have some problem with the scanf statement. So I'm simply going to initialize the number of stars. Say I want the number of stars as 15, or let me keep it as 10, and number of rows as 3. So we are going to have 3 rows of 10 stars each. So instead of reading the values from the user, I'm going to initialize it in the declaration statement itself. This is just to avoid some inconvenience that comes with this app. The next step is to, once you read the number of stars, then you have the nested for loop, where you have the for loop for the rows, and then inside that you have the for loop for number of stars. So I'm going to write this nested for loop now. For I equals to, so first I need to initialize the values of the iteration variables. So I'm going to declare 2 variables I and j, which is needed for our for loop. I'll iterate over I0, I less than number of rows, I++, and inside that I'll write another for loop. For j equals to 0, this for loop is for drawing the number of stars. Inside the drawing the number of stars, I'll write the printf statement because this is where we are going to print our stars. So I'm going to print a star and then I'll give /t to give some tab space after printing the stars. So this ends the inner for loop, this ends the outer for loop. Now let us visualize the execution of this program. The program begins with initialization of number of stars to 10 and number of rows to 3. So here we can see that the value of number of stars is initialized to 10 and number of rows to 3. The next statement is the outer for loop. The thing about nested for loops is that for each value of the outer for loop, the inner for loop, the complete inner for loop is executed. We'll see what it means. So we enter the first for loop, the value of I is set to 0. For value of I equals to 0, the next statement, that is the inner for loop, is executed. J equals to 0, J is less than number of stars. Number of stars is 10. So 0 is less than number of stars. It goes to the printf statement. It prints the value of star. Then it goes back, the control goes back to the inner for loop. Only after the entire inner for loop is complete, then the control returns to the outer for loop for the next value of I. This is how nested for loops work. So j equals to 1, it is less than number of stars, so it prints another star. Less than 1, prints star. Prints a star, prints a star. This goes on until the value of j reaches 10. Value of j is 9. The star is printed. The value of j now becomes 10. As soon as the value of j becomes 10, you can see that the control quit the inner for loop and it has gone back to the outer for loop. So now the value of I is incremented. I will be incremented by 1. And the inner for loop executes 10 times, another 10 times for the value of I equals to 1. So now when the value of j has reached 10, once again the control quits the inner for loop and goes back to the outer for loop for the next value of I. I was previously 1, now I will be incremented to 2. Since 2 is less than number of rows, it enters inside the for loop. So once again this inner for loop executes from the value of j equals to 0 until j reaches the number of stars. As soon as j reached 10, it quit the loop and the control goes back to the outer for loop. And here the value of I is 3. I is not less than 3. 3 is not less than 3. So even this condition is false and reaches the end of the program. Now let us take a look at the output of our program. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One thing we can notice in the output of this program is everything, all the 30 stars are printed on the same straight line. So that is because after printing every 10 stars, we need to print a new line to move to the next line. If we do that, then we'll get the correct output for the program. So let me just go back to the program, and then after the inner for loop is complete, after we print 10 stars, the next thing I want to do is add a /n or a new line to the code, and then so now after the inner for loop is executed, the next statement to be printed is new line, and then the control goes back to the outer for loop. Now we'll see the execution of this program and we'll check if the output is correct in this case. Now when I execute this program, see we are in the first iteration of the outer loop and we are inside the inner for loop, and the value of j has reached 9. After that the value of j is incremented to 10. When it is incremented to 10, what happens is the control doesn't go back to the outer for loop, instead it comes to /n. So it prints a new line and then it goes to the outer for loop. Now once again the inner for loop will be executed and we'll get the stars printed on the next line. So after printing 10 stars, a new line will be inserted into the output, and then this process continues. This is how we can make use of nested for loops to print 3 rows of 10 stars each.